right at 6:01. So I see a few people are logging in. I don't know, Laura, do we want to give them just a couple more minutes?
Sure. Yeah. Do you want me to share my screen just to have the
that
title
would be
up?
great. That would be
All right.
great. Hi, Kurt.
Hello.
As everyone comes in, if I could have you all mute yourselves. And I'm going to go through how we are going to recommend asking questions, just so we're not all talking all at once. And so it keeps the sound a little more clear. We don't get lots of echoes, but I will wait just a few minutes to go over the process for asking questions. Hopefully a few more people join in. Should have had this last week when it was cold outside instead of one of our last really nice weeks.
You know, I just took the dog for a walk and I was like, oh my goodness, if anyone's on the call, I'd be surprised.
My husband is out walking with our kids too.
Mm-hmm.
I did hustle and post it on a couple neighborhood Facebook pages, but it was
thank
like,
you.
yeah, but it's like the meeting's in 20 minutes. I'm not sure how effective that'll be.
Well, everything's online. We are going to record this video, so we can always send it to people or send people links. And then all of the information is on the website. So if anyone reads through it and has any questions, I am available at any time to answer any of those questions. Maybe let's wait till like 6:05 and then we can start.
Oh no.
I think we could probably go ahead. I don't see anyone else popping on. So I'm going to quick introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Monson. I'm a senior planner here at the City of St. Louis Park, and I am the primary planner working on the historic Walker Lake District. I worked on the revitalization plan that was done in 2018, 2019. And this is the implementation of the recommendations of that plan. With us, we have Laura Chamberlain. She is a planning consultant with the planning consultant group Hoisington Kogler and Associates, or group. And she has done a lot of the legwork on the actual zoning ordinance that we're proposing and the design guidelines. So we thank her for her help, and she will be doing the primary presentation tonight. We also have Mara Enoch. She just got married and told me how to pronounce her last name a few minutes ago, so it's going to take me a little while. And she is our administration person in community development, and she will be helping us administer tonight's meeting. And then we have two council members with us tonight. We have Margaret Rogg and Rachel Harris joining us. So I kind of already did introductions, but tonight we're going to it's a virtual meeting, and I'm going to ask everyone to stay muted. And if you have a question, to please type it in the chat box or raise your hands, and I will walk through that in just a minute. We are going to be going through the background of what's presented today, how we came up with the recommendations for the ordinance. as well as design guidelines, and go through what those specific ordinance and design guidelines are, as well as next steps, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. So again, I kind of already introduced all of us here from the city. We have presented all of this information at I don't know if it was the last business association meeting for Historic Walker Lake District. I think it was maybe the one previous. It was at the end of August. We presented the design guidelines and the recommendation of the ordinance at that meeting. So some business members have already seen these, so they might not join in our meeting today. So again, everyone is muted upon their entry to tonight's meeting. If you do have a question, we recommend that you use the chat feature or the raise hand. And if you are calling by phone, you can press *3 to raise your hand, or *6 to mute and unmute. Unfortunately, you have to unmute and unmute yourself if you are on the phone, but I don't think anyone is tonight. And we are recording this meeting so we can post it on the website or send it to anyone who is unable to attend, but they would have liked to. And so to raise your hand or type it in the chat window, if you click on the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen, it will give you the option to open the chat window and the participant window. If you do that, then the first option is to type your question in the chat box. And then the second is to click on the little raised hand icon in the participation window. And then once your hand is raised, we can unmute you and we will take your question. And I don't know if anyone's joining us on their phone, but it's very similar on your phone. The best way is to actually type your question in if you're on a mobile device. So if you press the 3 dots, and then click chat with everyone, and then you can type in your question and we will answer them as they come in. And I'm going to throw it over to Laura to dive in.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone. I apologize with my screen sharing. I don't really know how many participants we have on the call at this point, but I know that Mara and Jennifer will be monitoring any raised hands as far as when we get into the discussion. So tonight we're going to talk about the historic Walker Lake area and some of the processes that have gone from developing a vision and a revitalization plan into now the implementation of establishing a new zoning district for this area. Just a brief background and context. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the historic Walker Lake area. The historic element of it is really the city's start as a center of industry, based off of the location of the railroad in the mid-1800s. As St. Louis Park transformed into more of your traditional suburban city, the area around Walker Street and Lake Street became more of a mix of the small industrial as well as commercial businesses that we've seen today. The historic Walker Lake District Revitalization Plan was a visioning process that took place last year into this year. The vision that was established was to revitalize the area while preserving the existing character. And the revitalization plan was developed with input from area businesses and property owners, with a focus group, and was accepted by the City Council in early 2020. There were 4 different areas that the revitalization plan concentrated on as far as suggestions for moving forward from a city ordinance side of things. And those areas were parking, focusing on parking in the district and establishing parking regulations, allowing a greater mix of uses within the area, concentrating on building form, and that is the shape and orientation and architectural details of buildings, rather than as much concentrating on the uses within those buildings. And then also promoting a highly effective public realm in design and investment. As a takeaway from this revitalization plan, there were two elements that jumped out to staff, city staff, as far as implementation, and that the way to implement this plan was to establish a new zoning district for the historic Walker Lake area with standards and requirements, while also establishing a set of design guidelines that would be used alongside the zoning district, but allow more guidance rather than strict standards that need to be met. And as a note, the new zoning district will require a change within the comprehensive plan, which was recently adopted by the city through an amendment process that is happening simultaneously as reviewing the establishment of the new district. So current conditions of the area, the area is covered by a number of different zoning districts, multiple family residence, general commercial, industrial park, as well as general industrial. And the proposal is to, with the new district that is being established, to rezone this entire area into mixed use 2. And the mixed use 2 right now would only apply to this area, but could in the future apply to other areas of the city that perhaps want to meet these standards as well. In writing a new zoning district, we have different sections within that district standards. These are purpose and effect, district restrictions and performance standards, a uses table, and within that uses table, we also have uses permitted with conditions and uses permitted by conditional use permit, as well as accessory uses that are allowed within the district. The district standards go on with dimensional standards and then special provisions, and I'll give some highlights of most of these sections right now. So the highlights of uses, with the intention of creating this as a mixed use district, we wanted to allow a greater mix of uses than a lot of the existing zoning have, being the C2 general commercial. One of the elements that really came out of the revitalization plan was the opportunity to have food trucks and food vendors and temporary vendors, as well as permanent vendors, indoor and outdoor, as a use that could creatively use a lot of open spaces and available spaces within the area. The city staff, we decided to add vendor markets as a part of the definition of shopping center, which is allowed in the district. Breweries and micro distilleries have been allowed within the district, and they are permitted with conditions. Those conditions require a tap room on the primary street frontage, or at least some kind of retail element on the primary street frontage. This establishes kind of an active street front rather than just your kind of more industrial activities of production and distribution that will be happening more in the back of house. Research and development was a new use that had been added during the when the business park zoning district was established, and that has now been added as a use to this area as well. And also shifting a change for some of the parcels that are currently zoned industrial is now there are limitations on warehouse and storage uses in that those cannot be a primary function, but are limited to I believe it's 60% of the floor footprint of the floor area, excuse me. And that again, in the same way with the breweries and micro distilleries, to have an active street frontage, whether that's a showroom or an office space or something along those lines, and have the warehousing and distribution elements off of your street front. So dimensional standards being another element within the new zoning district, we have established with the focus of the revitalization plan of focusing on building form, establishing some standards that deviate a bit from traditional zoning. We've established a build to zone, which gives a minimum front setback as well as a maximum front setback. That ensures that any new development within the area will be facing the street and oriented towards that active street frontage that we're trying to get within the area. And there's also a requirement for lot coverage, a minimum percentage of how much of the front yard needs to be taken up by a building. For new buildings as well, we've established a minimum of 2-story height and a maximum of 3-story height. That's to keep in character with the surrounding buildings within that already exist in the Walker Lake area. Some of the special provisions, one of the main features of the revitalization plan was focusing on off-street parking. And city staff, as well as consulting staff, we actually established a whole set of parking minimums and maximums for this area in a process that had been adopted earlier in 2020. And one of the main features of those minimums and maximums is that buildings that exist that have their own parking currently are not required to find more parking, even if the use within those buildings change. Let's see, and there are additional district-specific provisions in regards to signs as well as architectural design, and those details are within the ordinance language itself. Finally, the special provisions do make reference to the design guidelines document as a way to further any reader with ideas of what we would like to see within the district without having those be established standards. So with that, I'm going to shift over to the draft document of the area design guidelines for historic Walker Lake. I'll shift over there. So the intention of this document, as I said before, is to provide guidance and additional ideas for any developers as well who might be coming into the area, as well as existing property owners and business owners or residents who want to improve their property, and to give general ideas as well as those, through that guidance. So we first start with looking at architecture and design, noting that the type of architecture that we're looking for, even though we're considering this a historic district, the architecture and design does not have to be historic in detail. However, it should mimic the form of and size and bulk of your historic features. So a great example, excuse me, is this one here. It's obviously the design is very modern and open, but it has the same size as well as, you know, where the split in the stories, the orientation of the entrance. It's mimicking some of those architectural details in, I guess, in spirit rather than in actual design. One of those elements, when as a focus, as we're establishing more of that active street frontage, is focusing on inviting entrances that encourage a lot of that street activity from a pedestrian level. And so these are some different guidance regarding entrances. Moving forward with, in general, the street facade, that is the design or the facade that we want to emphasize the most. Wanting to create what we call visual interest to make, and a lot of that visual interest can be accomplished through articulation of having your materials at different depths, as well as different materials interacting with each other. All of those things make the street facade more interesting as you're walking along, perhaps more inviting for someone who's walking along the street to want to come into your business. Awnings and canopies are another design element that we want to encourage, and those providing pedestrian, they can provide shade as well as protection from the weather, and they can also be used as a way to further the design of your building. As far as materials go, this area being more of your historic industrial area, we'd like to continue to follow that aesthetic, but encouraging innovative design features within that. Lots of brick and metal, or your metal accents within your windows, as well as some more modern materials as well. The design, we really wanted to emphasize that signs within this district can be their own element of design to add that interest and innovation to the district and kind of establish what that feel, or further the established feel that's already within the area. Pedestrian-oriented signs, what are called blade signs, as shown here and here, as well as temporary sidewalk signs to really encourage that interaction between your use as well as the and the public realm. And we also want to emphasize that lighting can be used, should be seen as a way to creatively bring in design elements, as well as highlight the names of businesses and make outdoor spaces more comfortable. One of the nice features of this area is that there are some interesting pockets of open space or kind of unused space, and the city and the area really wants to encourage those unused pockets to become kind of activated spaces, and they might not meet what we traditionally think of as open space, you know, not necessarily landscaped or a yard or something like that, but they can still be used quite effectively to create areas for interacting and activities in the district. One of the examples currently you can see there that currently exists in the area. And then landscaping, we do want to emphasize that landscaping is still important, but it might not be in the traditional sense as having your front yard with a tree in front. Elements that are more architectural, including rain gardens and stormwater retention, patio areas that have planters. All of these elements are encouraged, and that creativity and interaction between the public realm and the private realm are all encouraged within the district. All right, so I'm going to jump back over to our presentation. As far as next steps, after this meeting tonight, there is a public hearing on October 21st, and that's at the Planning Commission. I believe that meeting is going to be virtual. Jennifer, is that correct? Okay, I'm getting a head nod. So, okay, thank you. And the public hearing for that meeting will be for the comprehensive plan amendment, ordinance establishing the mixed-use zoning district, as well as rezoning of parcels to the mixed-use 2 zoning district. So many of you who maybe got mailings about this meeting will have already gotten information about those public hearings coming forward. Once the public hearing has happened, the Planning Commission will discuss and then make their recommendation, which then will go to the City Council. As of now, it looks like that would go before the Council in November, but we will have more details as that moves forward. All right, I'm going to open this up to Jennifer and Mara to bring up some of those questions.
Do you want to go through some of those questions that came through in the chat?
I would love to. We've had a few questions come through as you were talking, Laura. I'm just going to go through the list, and I tried to answer them while you were talking. Rachel Harris asks, for conditional use permits, would this expand potential uses beyond what is allowable now? And I said that the majority of the uses that are included in the Historic Walker Lake District were actually pulled from other sections of the code. So we looked at the Business Park Zoning District, the Industrial Zoning Districts, and the C1 and C2 districts, primarily C1, because that's more neighborhood commercial. And in general, almost all of the uses that are allowed in all of those districts are allowed in the Historic Walker Lake District. There are some uses that are that kind of went against what we heard when we did the revitalization plan. People are really looking for uses that they can walk to and that help create a more pedestrian-oriented district. So things such as large warehouses and gas stations and auto repair stores are not permitted in the new district. There are some of those uses within the district today that will remain legal non-conforming uses. So as long as they are operating, they are able to continue operating. The one auto repair store that is there today, they have already expanded to the maximum capacity that their site allows. So they can't expand any more than they are. So it's not really affecting them. But in general, more uses are allowed in this district than anywhere else in the city, because it's kind of a eclectic, everything goes in Historic Walker Lake. Another question that we got, which kind of went to the same thing, are there any C2 uses that would not be allowed in mixed use 2? Again, gas stations, they would remain, whatever's operating there can remain, but no new gas stations could come. New warehouses would not be permitted, as well as auto repair stations. I think that's generally the only uses that are not allowed. Otherwise, it's pretty much, like I said, kind of an anything goes district. That's how the Planning Commission categorized it when they reviewed the uses. And then, Kurt, you asked another question later on whether the warehousing limit would prohibit, or if it's enough for a warehouse for a brewery or a distillery. And that's what we have in other sections of the code. That's the amount of actual like storage they would be allowed. We don't consider their manufacturing process or warehousing use. So it's similar as what's allowed elsewhere for breweries and distilleries. And then going back up, let's see. Rachel Harris asked if the sign code will also be amended for the mixed use 2 zoning district. And I think I answered that wrong. But the city will be amending the sign code as part of amendments to this district. There's a number of amendments that need to be done to just bring the rest of the zoning ordinance references up to par with a brand new zoning district. So the sign code is included in that. But then we are also bringing a code amendment to the city council in the next few weeks to allow painted signs on buildings, which is currently not allowed, but it's recommended in the revitalization plan. And then some of the images in the design guidelines encourage signs painted on buildings. So that will be already hopefully adopted in the next few months before this ordinance even goes forward. And then in the next few, probably 12 months or so, we're looking to update the entire city's sign code. Oh, and Margaret said the sign code actually went to city council last night. So they already approved the first reading of the ordinance, and the second one will go in 2 weeks. That's all the questions that are in the chat box. If anyone has more questions, feel free to write them down or raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Jennifer, I think Maria added one more in there, commissary kitchens.
Maria, can you expand what you mean by a commissary kitchen, like a catering kitchen? Food trucks? Food trucks?
Well, it's me.
I'll speak.
Okay, go ahead.
I unmuted you. So
Hi,
go
sorry,
ahead.
it's Wayne and Maria.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Wayne and Maria.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, that was very ambiguous and it was fragmented, but we're looking to, we're excited about the idea of that area specifically. That's why we're tuned in. And we're specifically excited about the notion of very much in the manner and in the spirit of a food truck, but a shipping container, like let's just call it generically for a bistro box. And we want to do this in the manner of a cafe and have something that's semi-mobile. And this space that we're envisioning happens on the fringe that you were talking about, where it's the unique spaces, the end of an alley, and just that area, these odd shapes of that area, that triangle. And we'd like to set up something in that area in that capacity. So the question then is, with today, in what we're faced with right now, will the city be willing to expand the definitions of what a commissary is and the codes and the food safety, all that kind of stuff? And likewise, like a beer and wine licenses, did those expand? And so thank you for letting me speak, but go ahead.
Yeah. So first, I think we should set up a meeting offline to talk about this use. The use itself would likely be allowed in historic Walker Lake. It's more if you're using shipping containers and things like that, that is not potentially totally permanent. It's more of an issue with the building code and not the zoning code. So you would have to meet all of the requirements of that code. But from a zoning standpoint, I think it's a use that would definitely be allowed in the district. It's just a matter of finding that right place and meeting the building codes to make it happen. So I can I'll type in my phone number and my email, and please feel free to reach out to me, and we can set up a meeting offline and discuss with some other staff. Let's see, we have a couple more. I think we had another hand raised, Mara, from Ronald Hobson. And then there's a couple more questions in the chat box as well.
Okay, Ronald, I just unmuted you, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I got a little background to go through, and then I have two questions. So over the last day, I actually looked at the revised Walker Lake parking and took account for that. And so based on a parking space and then a portion of the aisle, a parking space is approximately 250 square feet. And in many of the uses, you have something that says one parking space per 250 square feet. So essentially what that means is that for every square foot of building, you need 1 square foot of parking. And where that becomes a challenge for me is that I guess when I look at Danforks, I just looked at it for an example. They have a, let me see, 3,015 square foot tap room. Based on the brewery, they would need 5,000 feet of parking, up to 10,000 feet of parking. And I guess my concern is that if you go to a 2-story building, like your minimum requires, you have that 5,000, 2,000, 5,000 to 3,000 square feet of parking required for the first floor. And then if you put office above that, that requires some more additional parking. Then essentially what it means is that if I build a 2-story building, I have to buy the neighbor building, tear it down and make it into a parking lot. And I don't think that's what we're going for.
Correct. Can I ask you if you looked in the proposed code for historic Walker Lake, or if you looked in the typical zoning district for parking requirements?
It's the proposed.
Okay, so like if you are using an existing building that's there today, you can intensify the uses as much as you want, and no additional parking is required.
That's understood. And I also understand that you can use some of the on-street parking as a credit.
Yep.
But the on-street parking that you can use as a credit needs to be with, like it says, there's a limit of 150 feet from your building or from the property line can be considered off-site parking.
Yes, that's correct.
So you can take a limited amount of off-street parking or on-street parking and credit it towards your building credit.
Correct.
My challenge, and I guess this will get to my two questions, is in the Twin Cities, have we seen, is there any examples of a 2 to 3 story building with parking that have been built in the last decade? And is there a list you can share? Because it feels like if this isn't viable, what essentially this code does is create a moratorium until a developer comes in and says, I want to build a 5-story building and we'll change the zone. So that's my concern, is that this isn't viable. And then my second question is, to make it walkable, I think of retail and restaurants. I don't think of a dentist's office. I know you mentioned a warehouse is not walkable, but I think of medical or dentist is not really too walkable, because I just go to the dentist, drive there and drive home. It's not like I go to the dentist and then, so I'm looking at retail and restaurants and how many retail and restaurants before people start thinking of it as a destination like 50th in France versus I'm going to Bunny's where you just have a single destination. So when what's that number that transforms it from a single spot to the area is a destination in itself? So those are my two questions.
Right. So there's a lot there. I'll start with the parking. So we have already, the way that you explain the parking, those numbers that are required, that's how the parking is for the entire city. So you have a certain amount of buildable area, you have to provide a certain number of parking spaces for that area. We have already drastically reduced the amount of parking that is required in Historic Lake. First of all, again, you can reuse the existing buildings, increase the intensity of those uses, and not require any additional parking. We're hoping that that incentivizes people to reuse the existing buildings rather than tearing them all down and changing the complete character of the district overnight. So we're hoping that incentivizes people to reuse what's there and maintain that character. In addition, anywhere else in the city, you would be required to do similarly. You would be required to provide that additional parking for the additional uses on the site in any district that you would go to. However, that amount of parking that is required in Historic Lake is drastically reduced compared to everywhere else in the city of St. Louis Park. For instance, one example of that is if you went into our C1 or C2 zoning district, you would be required to provide one space for every 60 square feet of restaurant use. Here in Historic Walker Lake, you have to provide one space for every 300 square feet of restaurant use. So that's just an example. But
so I just want to cut in, and so those are the numbers that I used, is the one
Right.
per 300. So essentially, one's with a parking space being 255 square feet. Essentially, what you have is for every square foot of restaurant, you have a square foot of parking, and that was my point. So I just want to make sure that your clarification, I like it, but it doesn't change the math that I previously mentioned.
Right. It's a lot of space of parking compared to building space, and that's the nature of parking. And we're St. Louis Park, and I don't know that we're quite at the point where our residents are comfortable completely getting rid of parking requirements. So slowly moving towards less parking requirement as we're seeing in this district, but I don't know that we're quite like Minneapolis where you're not required to provide parking. And that's one of the reasons why we are making these changes to Historic Walker Lake. When things were originally built, parking was not provided. So a lot of the uses that were moving into the district had to consistently get parking variances because they just couldn't move in. Like Mexico City Cafe, they were moving into an existing space, but because of our parking requirements, they had to get a parking variance of like 30 spaces in order to move into that space. So part of the reason we're doing this is to make the existing spaces better to occupy businesses and make it easier for businesses to move in, not necessarily make it easier to completely redevelop the entire district. So that's kind of where we're coming from with the parking. And then your other question about specific uses within the district to make it more pedestrian friendly. We are encouraging retail restaurant uses to move in. Again, that's really highly tied to that parking requirement because it is so high in other portions of the city that we want to make it easy for people to be able to move into Walker Lake with those uses. But at the same time, we're pulling the similar uses as we are throughout the rest of the city. And we do allow, like a dentist office on the ground floor throughout St. Louis Park. So we want to really be able to let any use go into these buildings. And we're more focused on the building form and less the specific uses that are within those buildings to drive pedestrian activity.
Well, I guess my question is there any literature out there that will help identify how much retail and restaurant it takes before it becomes an area that's walkable versus you're just going to a single shop and driving?
Right. I'm not 100, I don't know what that research is, but that's something that the city is currently working on. Historic Walker Lake, you drive by it on Highway 7. You don't know that it's there. And with COVID, Hennepin County has actually partnered with 10 cities, and they are helping us do a marketing plan for those 10 cities business districts. And there will be specific targeted marketing to bring people into historic Walker Lake. In the last few years, there's been a lot of new businesses relocating here. It's kind of seeing a renaissance with new businesses. It's driving a lot of new community members and people from outside the community into the area. So we're really hoping that additional advertising and marketing helps people recognize what's already here and drive additional businesses. But I don't know. I mean, I'd never done the research on what that the number of businesses needed to make it a walkable destination.
Okay. And I guess I like the fact that you're trying to reuse the buildings. I guess I have a fear that if there is no new development, then what happens is the land waits for 10 to 15 years until a developer feels that it's worth the effort to go through and get a zoning revision, like what happened at Union Flats. So at what point does the land become so valuable that they say, well, I'm going to go through the effort of rezoning it, go through this process, and then put in a 4 or 5 story building?
Right. Well, and that's one of the benefits of rezoning it to historic Walker Lake, where we're establishing the minimum and maximum building heights. A rezoning isn't a guaranteed decision by city council. It's a discretionary decision. And if city council decides that we don't want to change the character of the district from what the plan says, they don't have to approve it.
Well, that's my. So I guess I'm going circular, but if the zoning isn't viable because of parking requirements, and you require at least a 2-story building to replace any 1-story building there, and a maximum of 3 stories, and it's not a financially viable development, then it's essentially a moratorium, and no one builds until it's worth the effort to go in and put in a 5-story building. So what I was asking is, are there any developments in the Twin Cities areas that are 2 to 3 stories with underground parking, because we don't essentially want the building to tear down a neighboring building to provide the parking? So
Right.
if they haven't been built in a decade in the cities, that tells me that it's not a viable form to be built.
Right. I would have to look in to see if any examples that we could come up with.
Okay, because that's what I'm looking for, is if there's examples, then that really helps make me feel comfortable that this is viable.
Thanks. Great point.
Okay,
Right.
I'm done. I've taken up enough of your time.
Thanks for attending tonight's meeting. If you have more questions, just let us know.
Okay.
I think there's a couple more comments here.
Yeah, Kurt's comment is the one that we're at about the Gorham lot. If a brewery goes in, that lot will be needed. That's the comment we're at right now.
Thanks, Kurt. Very good point. And we have no plans to do anything with that lot except let it sit there until it is needed for parking, potentially. Because we see that as more uses come into the district, more parking will be needed, and that it's already a parking lot. It's just not used today, but we don't have any plans to do anything with it other than maybe a temporary, it could be a place for a temporary food truck mart or a temporary farmer's market until the time comes when that's needed for additional parking. And then there's another question from Rachel Harris. Which design feature received the most requests and which use? Good question. As part of the revitalization plan, I don't know if it was a specific feature. It was more this idea that the district remain neighborhood and pedestrian oriented. So more the massing scale of the buildings. I don't know that there's like, the number of windows on the building or the architecture. Like there was a lot of input on should the architecture look old or is it okay if the architecture looks modern, or a combination of the two. And I would say that there was definitely more input that said it should be flexible and it shouldn't be like a Disneyland historic district. It should reflect the architecture of its time. And uses, I think, kind of everywhere in the city, the most desired use are restaurant and coffee shop type uses. And I think there might be a comment down below that says, I'd love to see a cafe. Let's see, any other, let's see. Let's see. Tim, are you referencing the parking lot on Gorham? Yeah, so it will remain what it is. It might be, I don't know what improvements are being made to it. There's been a study on it and whether the city has the ability to close it off and see if that parking is needed today. It does need to be rebuilt, and typically those parking lots are assessed. Those fees to rebuild the parking lots are assessed to the businesses that use them. So if no one's using the parking lot currently, there's no one to pay for those repairs. So it's kind of in this state of, we know that we're going to need it for parking in the future. We don't want to sell it and get rid of it, but it's not being used for parking today. So I don't know if operations plans to just grass it over for the time being or what, but before they did that, they wanted to make sure that that parking was not needed today. So it's kind of in this state of figuring out what the best thing to do with it is at this time. Any other questions? I agree that it's an eyesore. Tim just made a comment that the parking lot's an eyesore. I agree. And then there's a number of things that the city's working on in historic Walker Lake. So along with the reconstruction projects that were happening last year and this summer, which will be done very shortly, there's some really cool art that's going to be put on the sidewalks throughout the district. It is poetry that people submitted their poems, and it will be like etched into the sidewalk. So when it's all done, go out and check it out. We're also working on wayfinding for the district. The city's received an active living grant from Hennepin County. And so we are working to get some wayfinding signage to help bring people into the district from Louisiana and Wooddale, and from the future, both Louisiana and Wooddale LRT stations. And that should hopefully be coming in the next few months to be installed. Otherwise, it might have to wait till spring, but it is definitely coming. And then, as I mentioned before, we're working with Hennepin County on just district marketing during COVID, letting people know that the businesses are open and there are safe procedures in place so people can still visit. We're doing a lot of work in historic Walker Lake, and we're very excited for all of the investment that's occurred and will occur.
There's one more question that popped in from Kurt Jennifer. If you grass it over, does it make rebuilding it much more costly, requiring charging stations?
You're probably right, Kurt, and that is why I am not an engineer. That's why they're doing their study to figure out how it should be done to reduce those costs when it eventually has to go back to a parking lot. Any other questions? Oh, and I was gonna type my phone number and my email in here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call or email. Everything is online on the city's website. So you can go check the ordinance out and the design guidelines. Otherwise, everything is going to Planning Commission on October 21st for a public hearing, and then they will make their recommendation, and it is on City Council's agenda for November 2nd. I keep wanting to say 6th, but I think it's the 2nd. 2nd. And Margaret just asked when the recording of this meeting will be posted. It's a pretty large file, so it might take us a few days to get it compressed in order to post online, but I'll try to do it by the end of this week or very early next week. Just put my phone number on there. Any other questions before we adjourn tonight's meeting? All right, seeing none, I hope you all have a wonderful evening and enjoy the beautiful weather this week before it starts getting cold. Thanks for joining tonight's
Thanks, all.
meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you.